It is Thursday. It's the 24th of July. You're watching ARIRANG Korea's only global network. Live from Seoul, I'm Moon Gon-young. It's been 100 days already since this country was struck by one of the worst maritime disasters in history. A passenger ferry with nearly 500 people on board capsized and sank in waters off Korea's southwestern coast, taking down with it more than 300 lives. What the ferry disaster revealed are also loopholes in the nation's safety management system and widespread corruption in the society. As our Yoo Li-an reports, more than 3 months out, there are more questions than answers regarding the ferry tragedy.
It's been 100 days since their loved ones were taken away from them.
I still try to take in the scent of my son, from his room, his blankets, and his bed. I haven't touched his room at all.
How far has the country come in giving these families the answer they so deserve on why the accident happened and who is responsible? The ruling and opposition parties have still been unable to come to an agreement over a special law on the Seoul accident aimed at uncovering the cause.
The whole nation has been asking for a new Korea, but the Park Geun-hye administration has not been able to take a single step forward since the disaster.
Using the suffering from the Seoul disaster for political gains dishonors the victims and hurts the victims' families.
Demanding progress on the bill, some victims' families have gone on hunger strikes and days-long marches. The massive manhunt for the practical owner of the Seoul ferry Yoo Li-an ended in vain when it was confirmed earlier this week that his heavily decomposed body was found last month. Taking responsibility over the failure to catch the fugitive shipping tycoon, the senior prosecutor in charge of the investigation, Choi Jae-kyung, offered to resign. Prosecutors also revealed that Yoo was hiding behind an upstairs wall in one of his villas in the south of the country, and that investigators had searched the building while he was presumably there. The revelations are only adding to the growing distrust of the prosecution, which has funneled massive financial resources into the investigation to no avail. Down in Pyeongchang Harbor at the site of the accident, search operations continue for the 10 victims that remain unaccounted for. 294 people have been confirmed dead. Yoo Li-an, ARIRANG News.
Now, more than 80% of the victims of the ferry sinking were high school students on their way for a field trip to Korea's southern Jeju Island. Confused by the crew's misleading instructions, only 75 of the 325 students aboard the ferry survived. In this very special report, our Song Ji-san tells us how they have been coping with.
The road to recovery for the 75 surviving students of the Seoul ferry tragedy continues. After the disaster on April 16th, the students were treated at the same hospital and have been going through group therapy sessions together since. And 1 month ago, on June 25th, they returned to classes at Danwon High School. Before the tragedy, the class of 2016 was made up of 10 different classes, which has now been reduced to 4. They now study in makeshift classrooms that were originally used as music or art rooms. The homerooms they used before April 16th have been left intact, preserved to honor the memories of those that perished. Their curriculum is different as well. Therapy sessions are held throughout the week, and 10 counselors are available on campus to help the students if and when they need it. To ensure privacy, media outlets are banned from filming the students or their classes.
We do not want any more attention from the public or media. Please refrain from filming or interviewing us.
But some are speaking out, urging people to remember their friends and to put pressure on the government to carry out a thorough investigation of the disaster.
Please do not forget April 16, 2014. The moment you forget about the Seoul ferry disaster, that's when our futures vanish.
While the junior class at Tanwon High School was the most affected by the tragedy, it's touched the lives of everyone there. For senior students prepping for college, it's been hard to study. To provide support, the National Assembly's Educational Committee approved a bill last week that expands the quota for college admissions for those affected by the disaster. Some 500 Tanwon High School seniors and the siblings of the victims will be eligible. 송지선, 아리랑 뉴스.
Now on to another plane crash, this one in Taiwan. A passenger plane crashed near the runway on its second landing attempt amid stormy weather conditions, killing dozens on board. On this Thursday, the leaders of China and Taiwan put their political differences aside to express their deepest condolences. Our Connie Kim has this story.
A Taiwanese passenger plane crashed Wednesday evening local time, killing at least 48 people and injuring 10 others on board amid stormy weather as it attempted to make an emergency landing at Megong Airport on Penghu Island. The Trans-Asia Airways turboprop was flying from Taiwan's southwestern Kaohsiung International Airport to Penghu Island off the west coast, carrying 58 passengers and crew on board. Struggling to cope with bad weather conditions brought on by Typhoon Matmo, the plane crashed on its second attempt to land at the airport. The Taiwanese government says the 10 passengers who survived the crash have been taken to the hospital.
Apart from the people who were sent to the hospitals, the remaining passengers probably died. The fire department just told me that, but we still have to verify the details.
The president of Trans-Asia Airways expressed deep sorrow over the accident.
I solemnly apologize to everyone. I apologize for this unfortunate event.
The crashed plane had been in service for 13 years, and the pilot had more than 20 years of experience and about 23,000 flying hours. Taiwan's Aviation Safety Council is investigating whether the weather conditions or human error caused the accident. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
Now, at the nation's top office tomorrow, Friday that is, President Park Geun-hye is expected to sit down with the governor of Tokyo in Seoul upon his request. Governor Yoichi Masuzoe's three-day visit to Korea centers around expanding exchanges between Seoul and Tokyo, but is garnering just as much attention for its timing. Bilateral relations remain tense amid historical and territorial differences between the two countries. And this Friday's meeting will be the first between President Park and a Japanese politician since she took office early last year. The Korean president has yet to meet with her Japanese counterpart Shinzo Abe, who reportedly told Masuzoe before he departed for Seoul about his desire to improve relations with Korea. Meanwhile, a Japanese lawmaker says his country has not gone as far as it can toward resolving the unresolved matter of Korean women forced into sexual servitude by the Japanese military leading up to and during World War II. Well, the comments come amid renewed talks on that issue between Seoul and Tokyo. Our foreign affairs correspondent Hwang Sang-hee reports.
An 8-term Japanese lawmaker says Tokyo can do more to resolve the issue of Japanese military's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women. At a Heritage Foundation forum in Washington on Wednesday, Takeo Kawamura of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party said Japan has been working to resolve the issue of the so-called comfort women and that it is willing to deal with this. Kawamura added Japan could take the same measures it had done in the past for the 55 surviving Korean victims. These may include providing a letter of apology for the comfort women and some financial compensation from a civilian-led fund. The offer for such civilian-led compensation was rejected by South Korea in the 1990s, as Seoul saw it as the Japanese government's attempt to avoid direct responsibility. Kawamura's remarks come after South Korea and Japan resumed talks on Tokyo's sexual slavery in Seoul on Wednesday, the first such meeting since Japan went back and reviewed its 1993 Kono Statement, which apologized to the so-called comfort women. The Abe administration, while upholding the landmark statement, claimed last month that Seoul was in close consultation with Tokyo when it was being drawn up. Around 200,000 women, mostly Korean, were forced to serve the Japanese military in the early 20th century. But killing any anticipation for concrete progress between the two neighbors, Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga expressed regret over Seoul's reaction. During a press briefing Wednesday, Suga said the review was conducted in an objective manner by experts. Suga added Japan has no plans for new measures to solve the comfort women issue. Hwang Sang-hee, ARIRANG News.
When the latest news meets the latest business stories, we give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Business Today with Moon Gon-young. Every weekday, only on ARIRANG.
President Park Geun-hye presided over a ministerial meeting earlier this Thursday where her new economic team laid out the economic policy direction for the latter half of this year. Now there, she highlighted the need to cut out the red tape that has been deterring domestic investment, while stressing the urgent need to revitalize the economy following April's ferry disaster. The president said a task force should be established to remove unnecessary regulations to create jobs, specifically in medicine, tourism, and finance. Now, positively assessing the government's proposed measures to spur domestic demand, the president asked her officials to seek to expand and improve the current retirement pension system. On public sector reform, President Park talked about removing each organization's excessive functions to bring down their debt level. And as we just mentioned, it was during this meeting that the nation's new economic team, led by Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan, unveiled new stimulus plans to breathe life into the sputtering economy. Now, government spending would increase by $11.4 billion, and another $28 billion would be available for SMEs through loans and other financial support. And medium-sized companies will also benefit from this. Our Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
Korea's new economic team is all geared up to shake the country out of its low-growth rut. The finance ministry said Thursday that the government will seek aggressive fiscal policies that will boost spending by some 12 trillion won, or roughly $11 billion in the second half of this year. That's equivalent to nearly 1% of Korea's GDP. The extra funds will be used to support homebuyers, small and medium-sized businesses, and tourism, and improve the distribution of agricultural products. The government would also set aside around $25 billion in loans and funds to promote corporate activities. The ministry said it will seek an expansionary fiscal policy, even at the risk of running a short-term fiscal deficit. The government also cited the nation's relatively healthy fiscal situation. Korea's government debt to GDP ratio stood at under 34% last year, far lower than the OECD average of over 110%. The ministry also laid out plans to boost domestic demand by providing tax incentives to companies that raise wages. It also plans to tax companies that shy away from investment, wage increases, or dividend payments in favor of hanging on to excessive cash reserves. The government will also accelerate regulatory reforms, and especially that linked to bolstering the nation's real estate market by giving homebuyers easier access to mortgage loans. The measures are based on the new economic team's revised growth outlook for this year. It cut its growth forecast to 3.7%, down 0.4 percentage points from its earlier projection, saying the pace of recovery slowed on sluggish domestic demand. The government expects its expansionary fiscal policy to raise the growth by 0.1 percentage points this year. Hwang Ji-hye, ARIRANG News.
And earlier this Thursday, the nation's central bank said the Korean economy grew at 3.6% from a year earlier in the April to June period, after expanding 3.9% in the first quarter. That is the slowest growth in 3 quarters. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Korea's economic growth took a step backward in the second quarter of the year. The Bank of Korea says gross domestic product increased 0.6% during the April to June period from the previous quarter. That's 0.1 percentage point lower than the central bank's earlier estimate for the second quarter. Central bank officials say growth was hampered by April's Sewol disaster that dampened domestic demand. Private spending was cut by 0.3%.
Due to Sewol ferry disaster, the government could not enforce budgetary matters on schedule. And also there is poor spending sentiment among major participants of the economy. It wasn't more than we thought it would. We will have to wait and see how long the sentiment will continue to affect the economy.
The central bank adds, however, the Korean economy is modestly recovering with rising exports and improving investment. Fueled by a surge in shipments of LCD displays and chemical goods, exports increased 1.9% from the previous quarter. Construction investment inched up 0.6%, while investments in machinery and transportation equipment gained 1.3%. An analyst from Seoul-based IM Investment and Security says the economy will pick up in third quarter.
The Sewol incident dragged down domestic demand at the end of April and May, but it stopped affecting consumption in June. GDP growth in the third quarter is expected to recover by up to 0.9 or 1%.
The analyst said he believes Korea's GDP in the third quarter could rise up to 4% compared to the same period last year. Kim Jeon, ARIRANG News.
Well, major bourses around the world are showing a strong start for the second half amid ample liquidity. Among some 20 key stock markets, Korea's Kosdaq showed the second strongest growth, gaining more than 5% from the end of June until Wednesday, yesterday that is, as investors snapped up blue chips. Now, Brazil's stock market recorded the biggest surge, up 9% on the back of a stable local currency, while Southeast Asian countries also showed robust growth, led by the Indonesian bourse's 4% rise. In the U.S., the Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 3% during the same period to hit the 17,000 mark for the first time ever. Meanwhile, Korea's airports were busy in the first 6 months of this year. The Transport Ministry says that the number of international passengers flying into and out of Korea grew 9.6% from January to June to over 26 million. Well, the spike was due mostly to a higher number of passengers flying between Korea and China, which rose more than 25% on year. On the opposite side of the spectrum, the number of people flying to and from Japan dropped nearly 5%. Well, Korea has always prided itself on its ability to innovate and push the boundaries in the sector of science and technology. And it shows. In the latest Global Innovation Index 2014, Korea jumped 2 spots from last year to be ranked the 16th most innovative country in the world. Well, Korea scored slightly over 55 points out of 100. And these annual rankings published by Cornell University, INSEAD, and the World Intellectual Property Organization surveyed 143 countries based on 81 categories that measure their innovation capabilities and measurable results. Switzerland topped the list with nearly 65 points, followed by the UK and Sweden. So the Korean government stimulus plans unveiled today. Government spending would increase by $11.4 billion and another $28 billion would be available to small and medium-sized companies through loans and other financial support. And that's just one of the many measures announced by the new economic team today. Dr. Kim Byung-ju joins me live to take a closer look. So, Dr. Kim, several different actions announced today to boost the sluggish economy. Which among them would you say deserves the most attention?
I think the measures announced to design to boost the overall demand at home, I think that was quite interesting, even though we were hearing the ideas for the last few days, such as the tax incentives and also different designs for taxing corporations, for those who are not increasing the wages or increasing dividends, and also not active in investment. So those corporations who are going aggressively on raising the rates and then increasing the dividend and then increasing the investment as a whole, they will enjoy the benefits. I think those measures were quite creative in a way and noticeable. The whole picture, I'll have to say, if we take all the numbers at their face value, I think it's a pretty much heavy dose, 41 trillion won additional injection, or that's what they claim, into the economy in the form of like a 11.4 trillion won extra spending, as you mentioned, and also other 29 trillion won being put into the economy in the form of lending. So heavy dose overall, and then very broad fronts. As you mentioned, the list is very long, has a lot of items for action. So comprehensiveness of the package itself is something that really attracts our attention. And these, broad range of actions were summarized into three groups: stimulation, and then helping the ordinary citizens for their daily lives, improving their life quality, and also, I wouldn't call it reform, but overall, what's the best way? Innovating the structure of the economy. The thing is, however, the list is long, the dose is pretty heavy in terms of numbers and all that, but personally, I don't find that many are very meaningful, significant actions. The quantity, I think, shows more impressive side rather than the quality itself.
Right, so quantity taking over quality in terms of this set of measures. Now, this announcement came out with the revised growth forecast, so the government lowering the nation's growth outlook for this year to 3.7%, and this is really not a number that has surprised many.
I don't think so, yeah, because the Bank of Korea has previously already revised their number downwards from the over 4% down to like 3.8%. So 3.7%, the government figure itself is not surprising at all. And a lot of critics and skeptics were saying, well, this downward revision was necessary no matter what was happening, because initial projection was too ambitious. Over 4% growth itself.
4.1%.
Yeah, and considering the overall growth potential for the national economy, they were saying there was a little bit of too ambitious anyway to begin with. But however, government this time emphasized the variables for the second half of this year, including the oil price, likelihood of oil price to go up, and also the further strengthening of won. So Korea being such an externally, the trade-dependent economy, they were saying these kind of variables will make a negative impact on the economy. Again, no surprise there. What I noticed that was quite interesting was their projection on the consumption and the inflation. Consumption, even though I think the numbers are reasonably strong, I emphasize reasonably here, taking account of the sinking of Sewol Ferry and all that kind of stuff. Still, I think it's reasonably strong, but government seems to be a little bit, pessimistic about that front. And the inflation, I think they were overly optimistic, keeping their position that inflation will not be very significant. So those 2 points, I think, will be further disputed down the road.
Now, what we're noticing it seems like there are many tax benefits and incentives in this set of stimulus package. Now, shouldn't we be concerned about the nation's fiscal health overall?
I think that the reaction from the economists could be best summed in the form of skepticism about the fiscal future now. Even though Korea has a very strong fiscal structure, fiscal health at this point, they're saying, well, we just have found out that there is a big time tax revenue shortage for this year. Originally, the tax revenue this year was projected to be 216 trillion won, but now government has revised its forecast for the tax revenue down to 208 trillion won. So there is 8.5 trillion won shortage in terms of tax revenue. So when government announces this kind of ambitious increased spending, they're saying, well, what are we going to do about the overall fiscal balance? So that's another big question.
And, at the National Assembly, we saw mixed responses to today's announcement.
Right, indeed. Both, I think, the ruling party and then opposition party side, they expressed caution. They were saying even the ruling party members, such as Na Sung-nin, leading party member of the Finance Committee at the National Assembly, he said, well, all these ideas sound pretty good, but we have to be very cautious about it because there seems to be a slight lack of consensus about the overall status of the economy. I think that's what we were talking about before, the previous days here. And also opposition party said, boosting the economy is always a good idea. However, we have to keep in mind the overall health and the balance of the fiscal structure here for the Korean government. So looks like the reaction, at least from the National Assembly so far, has been quite reserved.
Right, and I think because it's so massive in quantity, it will take some time for all of us to, go through it and break it down, to study it and then really understand whether it's just full of talk or whether it is really meaningful action that they have unveiled.
Absolutely, I agree with that.
All right, Dr. Kim Byung-ju, thank you so much for today.
Thanks.
And before we close, this just coming in, we are getting news that a tour bus carrying Korean tourists in Australia has crashed. We don't have any immediate details on the fate of those on board, but early reports are saying that at least one person has been killed and there has been a few casualties, and we'll have more details available for you in our next newscast. But that is your business today on this Thursday. Thank you for watching and do join us again at 6 p.m. Korea time on Early Edition at 6.